The scent of rosemary and garlic from the roasting beef filled Loretta Patterson's meticulously clean dining room, mingling with the delicate perfume of fresh lilies arranged in a crystal vase. At 65, Loretta had always found solace in order and beauty, and her upcoming birthday dinner was to be a testament to both. For 3 weeks, she had poured her heart into the preparations, a labor of love for the family she cherished above all else. She'd spent countless hours poring over cookbooks, finally settling on a menu that balanced classic comfort with a touch of celebratory elegance. The dining room, usually reserved for holidays, was transformed. Antique lace tablecloth, polished silver gleaming under the soft glow of the chandelier, and place cards, each a miniature work of art in her elegant script. Elliot Meadow, little Tommy, who had just turned 7. Sweet Emma, 5 years old. Her sister Ruth, Ruth's husband Carl, and of course herself at the head of the table where she could oversee every joyful face. Loretta had even indulged in a new dress, a navy blue silk with tiny, shimmering pearl buttons that Elliot, her son, always said made her look particularly elegant. She'd sent out invitations weeks ago, followed by gentle reminders just 2 days prior, ensuring everyone had the date and time etched into their calendars. Birthday dinner, 6 p.m. Saturday. The anticipation had built steadily, a warm, comforting hum in her chest. She imagined the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the children's excited chatter as they devoured the chocolate cake she'd spent all morning perfecting. By 6:30, the silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was expectant, then unnerving. Loretta checked her phone for the 3rd time, pulling it from the pocket of her new dress, her fingers brushing against the cool pearls. Had she gotten the time wrong? No, her calendar confirmed it. 6 p.m. She'd sent reminders to everyone, a gentle nudge to ensure no one forgot. The candles, lit an hour ago, were already burning down to stumps, their flames flickering nervously. The aroma of the roast, once inviting, now seemed to mock her, growing cold in the oven. The chocolate cake, a masterpiece of dark ganache and fresh berries, sat perfect and uncut on the kitchen counter, a monument to a celebration that wasn't happening. At 7 o'clock, a tremor of unease turned into a cold dread. She called Elliot's phone. Straight to voicemail. Then Meadow's phone. Her daughter-in-law. The same automated, cheerful message. Ruth, her sister, was next. Ruth, who always picked up on the second ring, no matter what. Nothing. Just the endless, hollow ring of an unanswered phone. Loretta stood in her dining room, a tableau of untouched plates and wilting flowers. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken questions. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe something came up at the last minute. These things happen, she told herself, her voice a thin whisper in the cavernous silence. Even as her chest felt tight, a band of ice squeezing her lungs, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking, a nervous tremor she couldn't control. By 8 o'clock, the last vestiges of hope had evaporated. They weren't coming. The realization settled in her bones, cold and heavy. She sat down heavily in her chair, the elegant navy blue silk rustling, staring at the 7 empty seats around her. This wasn't just lateness. This was something else entirely, something deliberate, something cruel. The silence in her house felt different now. Not peaceful, but hollow, vast, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for a scream that wouldn't come. That's when she made the mistake. The fatal error of checking Facebook. There, at the very top of her feed, was a photo that made her blood freeze in her veins. Meadow, radiant in a flowing white sundress, her face glowing with an almost triumphant smile. Her arm was wrapped possessively around Elliot, who was grinning wider than Loretta had seen him in months. Behind them, the deep, impossibly blue of the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, a postcard-perfect backdrop. The caption, bold and cheerful, read, "Living our best life on the Mediterranean. So grateful for this amazing family getaway." Loretta scrolled down, her fingers numb. More photos. Tommy and Emma, her beloved grandchildren, building intricate sandcastles on a pristine, sun-drenched beach. Ruth and Carl, her own sister and brother-in-law, clinking cocktail glasses at what looked like an elegant ship's bar, their faces relaxed and happy. Everyone was there. Everyone, except her. The timestamp showed the photos were posted just an hour ago, while Loretta was sitting here, waiting, watching the candles burn down. They were thousands of miles away, toasting with champagne and laughing at some sunset dinner on a cruise ship, utterly oblivious, or perhaps deliberately indifferent, to her existence. She felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, not shatter into a million pieces, but crack. Like ice on a frozen lake when the temperature drops too fast, the fissures spreading silently beneath the surface. They'd planned this, all of them. Meadow had orchestrated a family vacation that deliberately excluded her, scheduled it precisely for her birthday, and somehow convinced everyone to go along with it. Even Ruth, her own sister, her confidant, who had helped her pick out decorations for this very party just last week, had betrayed her. Loretta stared at that photo until her eyes burned, until Meadow's radiant smile seemed to mock her, to gloat. Meadow was standing exactly where Loretta should have been, at the center of her family, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love her most. Her phone buzzed, a jarring sound in the oppressive quiet. A text from Elliot. "Sorry, Mom. Forgot to mention we'd be out of town this week. Meadow booked a surprise trip. Happy birthday, though. Forgot to mention." As if a Mediterranean cruise was something you just casually forgot to tell your mother about. As if booking it precisely on her birthday was pure coincidence, an innocent oversight. Loretta set the phone down carefully, her hands still trembling, afraid she might throw it against the wall if she held it any longer. The roast was definitely cold now, a solid, unappetizing lump in the oven. She walked to the kitchen and turned off the gas, her movements mechanical and strange, as if she were a puppet on strings. She felt like she was watching herself from outside her body, observing this sad, diminished woman in her elegant navy blue dress, cleaning up the dinner no one came to eat. She wrapped the perfect, untouched chocolate cake in plastic and put it in the refrigerator, a silent burial. She blew out what remained of the candles, their tiny wisps of smoke dissolving into the heavy air. She started loading the good china back into the cabinet, each plate clicking against the others with a sound that seemed too loud, too sharp, in the quiet house. Meadow had won something tonight, though Loretta wasn't entirely sure what game they'd been playing or what the prize was. All she knew was that for the first time in her 65 years, she felt truly invisible. Not just overlooked or forgotten, but erased. As she turned off the dining room lights, plunging the room into shadow, she caught her reflection in the dark window. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, a shadow of her former self. The woman staring back at her had spent decades being the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over arguments, remembered everyone's birthdays and anniversaries, the one who always put family first, sacrificing her own needs for theirs. And they'd all chosen to spend her birthday pretending she didn't exist. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, each step heavier than the last, the silk dress clinging to her like a shroud. Tomorrow, she'd have to face the aftermath. The fake apologies, the flimsy excuses about miscommunication, Meadow's sweet, cloying voice explaining how the trip was booked months ago, and there was nothing they could do. But tonight, Loretta just needed to sit with this pain, to really feel it, to let it wash over her. Because something deep inside told her this wasn't just about a missed birthday party. This was about something much bigger, much darker, and much more deliberate than she'd ever imagined. Sleep was an elusive phantom that night. Loretta lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness of her room mirroring the void in her heart. Her mind, usually a calm, organized space, was now a frantic kaleidoscope of memories, cycling through every family gathering from the past 5 years. The abandoned birthday, she realized with a sickening certainty, wasn't just forgotten. It was deliberately sabotaged. And as the hours crept by, each ticking minute amplifying her dread, other memories, once dismissed as minor mishaps or innocent oversights, started surfacing, each one clicking into place, forming a picture that was increasingly unsettling. She remembered Tommy's 4th birthday party. Loretta had been so excited, planning to capture the moment her grandson blew out his candles, his little face alight with joy. But when she arrived at the brightly decorated venue, Meadow had met her at the door with that perfected, apologetic smile. "Oh, Loretta, didn't Elliot tell you? We had to move the party to tomorrow." Little emergency came up. Yet, through the slightly ajar door, Loretta could hear children laughing inside, could see balloons bobbing through the window. When she called Elliot later, he'd seemed genuinely confused. "Tomorrow? No, Mom. The party's definitely today." Meadow must have mixed up the dates. Loretta had shrugged it off then, attributing it to Meadow's occasional flakiness. Now, it felt like a deliberate act of exclusion. Then there was Emma's first day of kindergarten. Loretta had asked Meadow 3 times what time they were dropping her off. Camera ready, eager to capture the milestone. "Oh, we're doing it super early," Meadow had chirped. "Like 7 a.m.? Probably too early for you, Loretta." Despite the subtle discouragement, Loretta had shown up anyway, only for the teacher to inform her that Emma had been there since the normal time, 8:30. She'd missed her granddaughter walking into her classroom, missed her nervous little wave goodbye to Elliot. Another missed moment, another pang of regret. Last Christmas, the memory was particularly sharp, stinging like a fresh wound. Meadow had called her 2 days before, her voice tight with false concern. "Loretta, I hate to do this, but Elliot's been feeling really overwhelmed with work stress. He asked if we could keep Christmas dinner small this year, just immediate family. You understand, don't you?" Loretta, ever the understanding mother, had spent Christmas alone, reheating leftovers and watching old movies, a quiet ache in her chest. Later, she found out from Ruth that they'd had a huge celebration. Ruth had seen the photos on Instagram. 20 people, including Elliot's college friends and several neighbors. Everyone except Loretta. Each memory felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place, forming a grotesque picture she'd been too blind, too trusting, to see. This wasn't a pattern of miscommunication or innocent scheduling conflicts. This was systematic, calculated, a meticulously crafted campaign of isolation. As the first rays of dawn pierced through her bedroom curtains, Loretta got up and made coffee, her hands still trembling from exhaustion and something else, a growing sense of dread that settled deep in her stomach. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through Meadow's social media posts from the past year, really looking at them for the first time, stripping away the filter of her own naive trust. There she was at Tommy's school play, sitting in the front row next to Elliot, beaming. Loretta remembered asking about that play specifically, and Meadow had told her it was canceled due to a flu outbreak. There she was at Emma's dance recital, the one Meadow had dismissed as just a practice session. Nothing special. Photo after photo of precious family moments, milestones, and everyday joys that Loretta had been deliberately excluded from. Each one tagged with saccharine captions about precious family memories, and blessed to have these people in my life. The cruelest part was how natural it all looked. Meadow's arm draped possessively around Elliot. The children clustered close to their parents, their faces full of innocent adoration. Everyone smiling, laughing, like they belonged together, like they were complete without her, like she had never existed at all. Loretta set the phone down, the cold metal feeling heavy in her hand. She walked to her kitchen window, looking out at the garden she'd planted when Elliot was a boy. He used to help her weed these flower beds, his small hands careful with the delicate stems, his face smudged with dirt. When had she lost him? When had he stopped seeing her as essential to his happiness, to his life? The answer came with startling clarity, sharp and painful. When Meadow entered their lives, before Meadow, Elliot called her twice a week. They had standing dinner dates every other Sunday. He'd ask her advice about work problems, share stories about his day, his voice full of the easy intimacy of a loving son. He was her son, her friend, her connection to a future she'd helped create. Meadow changed that, gradually, subtly, so slowly that Loretta didn't notice until it was too late, until the erosion was complete. First, the Sunday dinners became monthly. Meadow's been planning these elaborate meals, Mom, Elliot had explained, a hint of pride in his voice. She loves having me all to herself on weekends. Then the phone calls dwindled to obligation check-ins on holidays, quick, rushed conversations. Sorry, Mom. Can't talk long. Meadow's got us scheduled pretty tight today. Meadow never said anything directly against Loretta. That would have been too obvious, too easily countered. Instead, she operated in the spaces between words, in the silences that followed her carefully placed suggestions. Your mom seems tired lately. Maybe we shouldn't burden her with the kids this weekend. Or, I saw your mom at the grocery store yesterday. She looked a little confused about something. Do you think she's doing okay living alone? Subtle implications that Loretta was becoming a burden, a concern, someone who needed managing rather than including. Loretta thought about the way Meadow hugged her at family gatherings, always a beat too long, her hand rubbing Loretta's back like she was a fragile elderly relative who needed comforting rather than an equal, vibrant member of the family. The way she'd interrupt when Loretta was talking to the children, smoothly redirecting their attention to something else. Grandma Loretta's had a long day, sweeties. Why don't you show Daddy your new toy instead? And Elliot, her beautiful, trusting son, had absorbed it all without question. He'd started looking at Loretta the way Meadow did, with a mixture of affection and pity, like she was something precious but increasingly irrelevant. The phone rang, startling Loretta from her grim thoughts. Elliot's name flashed on the screen, a jarring reminder of the distance between them. Hi, Mom. His voice was cheerful, relaxed, in a way that made Loretta's chest ache. Just wanted to call and say happy belated birthday. Sorry we missed it, but this trip has been incredible. Meadow really outdid herself with the planning. Loretta gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white. Yes. I saw the photos. Oh. Good. Meadow's been posting like crazy. The kids are having such a blast. Tommy learned to snorkel yesterday, and Emma made friends with this little girl from Boston. You would have loved seeing them. Would I? Loretta thought bitterly. Because from where she sat, it seemed like no one had even noticed she wasn't there. The trip was very last minute, Loretta said carefully, testing the waters. I know, right? Meadow found this amazing deal and just went for it. She's always been spontaneous like that. One of the things I love about her. Spontaneous. That's what he called deliberately booking a cruise on his mother's birthday, thousands of miles away. Elliot. Loretta started, then stopped. What could she say? That his wife was manipulating him? That she'd spent years systematically excluding her from his life? He'd think she was jealous, bitter, unable to accept that he'd grown up and moved on. Maybe she was all those things. But she was also right. Everything okay, Mom? You sound off. Loretta closed her eyes, feeling the crushing weight of all those lost moments. All those times she'd been edited out of her own family story. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Well, get some rest. We'll be back next week, and I promise we'll plan something special to make up for missing your birthday. Another empty promise from Elliot that Meadow would find a way to break. After she hung up, Loretta sat in her kitchen for a long time, watching the light change as morning moved toward afternoon. She thought about the years ahead. More birthdays spent alone, more grandchildren's milestones missed, more family photos where her absence was so complete. It was like she'd never existed at all. For the first time since her husband died 8 years ago, she felt truly orphaned. Not by death this time, but by something arguably worse, by the deliberate, methodical erasure of her place in the only family she had left. But as the anger built in her chest, hot and bright, a new realization dawned. She wasn't going to disappear quietly. If Meadow wanted to play games, she'd picked the wrong opponent. Loretta had raised Elliot when his father left them. She'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed her own dreams to ensure he had every opportunity. She'd earned her place in this family, and she wasn't giving it up without a fight. She just needed to figure out what she was really fighting against. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after her abandoned birthday party. The house still carried the faint, lingering scent of lilies and disappointment. Loretta was still in her robe, nursing her second cup of coffee, staring blankly at the stack of elegant thank you cards she'd bought for a celebration that never happened. The sudden, insistent ring of the doorbell startled her, making her spill a few drops of coffee onto her robe. She wasn't expecting anyone. Honestly, unexpected visitors had become a rarity in her carefully managed social isolation, a consequence of Meadow's subtle yet effective campaign. Through the peephole, she saw a man she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, perhaps, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and worry lines etched deep around his eyes, giving him a perpetually anxious look. He was well-dressed in a dark suit, but rumpled, as if he'd been traveling for days. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, and he kept glancing around nervously, like a fugitive, as if he wasn't sure he should even be there. Loretta almost didn't answer. After the cruise incident, her emotional reserves were depleted, and she wasn't in the mood for solicitors or missionaries or whatever this stranger might want. But something about his posture, the way he seemed to be gathering courage just to stand on her porch, made her pause. There was a vulnerability in his stance that piqued her curiosity. "Can I help you?" Loretta called through the closed door, her voice cautious, a slight tremor in it. "Mrs. Patterson?" His voice was careful, hesitant, almost a whisper. "Loretta Patterson? Elliot's mother?" Loretta's chest tightened, a familiar clench of anxiety. How did this stranger know her son's name? Who was asking? He was quiet for a moment, then said something that made her blood run cold, chilling her to the bone despite the warmth of the morning. "My name is David Chen. I need to talk to you about Meadow." Loretta opened the door slowly, keeping the heavy security chain latched, creating a narrow, defensive gap. "What about Meadow?" she asked. Her voice barely above a whisper, her heart beginning to pound. David Chen looked even more nervous up close. His hands were trembling slightly, visibly shaking as he spoke, and there were dark circles under his eyes, deep hollows that suggested he hadn't slept in days, perhaps weeks. "This is going to sound crazy, Mrs. Patterson," he began, his voice cracking. "But I think my son might be living in your son's house." The chain felt suddenly heavy in Loretta's hands, a cold, metallic weight. "What are you talking about? Tommy?" she asked, the name of her grandson catching in her throat. He said. And the name hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. The little boy, 7 years old, brown hair, has a scar on his chin from falling off his bike when he was 4. Loretta stared at him, her mind reeling, struggling to process the impossible words. Tommy did have a scar on his chin. Elliot had told her about the bike accident, how scared they'd all been rushing him to the emergency room, the stitches, the frantic worry. But how would this stranger know that intimate detail? "I think you'd better come in," Loretta said, her voice barely above a whisper, her hand fumbling with the chain. David Chen sat on her couch, perched on the very edge, like he might bolt at any second, his eyes darting around the room, taking in every detail. Loretta offered him coffee, but he shook his head, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white, his whole body radiating tension. "I don't know where to start," he said, his voice strained. "This is going to sound insane." "Try me," Loretta replied, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her lips. "I've had a very strange week." He took a shaky breath, then began his story, his voice thick with old pain and lingering disbelief. "Meadow and we were together for 2 years. This was before she met your son, before she got married. We lived together, talked about marriage, the whole thing. And then, She got pregnant. Loretta's coffee cup suddenly felt too heavy, too precarious. She set it down carefully on the coaster, afraid she might drop it, afraid of what revelations were coming. I was so happy, David continued, a flicker of that past joy momentarily crossing his face before being replaced by sorrow. I wanted to marry her immediately, start planning our life together. But Meadow, she kept putting me off. Said she needed time to think, wasn't ready for such a big step. He paused, taking another ragged breath. Then one day, I came home from work, and she was gone. Just gone. All her stuff, everything. Like she'd never lived there at all. Did you look for her? Loretta asked, her voice barely audible. Of course I did. For months. I filed a missing person report. Hired a private investigator. Posted on every social media platform I could think of. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of profound weariness. The investigator finally told me to give up. Said, "Some people just don't want to be found." Loretta was starting to feel sick, a cold dread spreading through her stomach. What does this have to do with Tommy? 3 months ago, David said, his eyes fixed on hers. I was at a conference in Sacramento, just walking around downtown during lunch, and I saw them, Meadow, and a little boy who looked exactly like me at that age. Same eyes, same chin, even the same way of tilting his head when he's concentrating. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I followed them for 3 blocks, Mrs. Patterson. I watched that little boy, and I knew he was mine. The room felt like it was spinning around Loretta. You're saying Tommy is your son? I'm saying I think he is. Meadow was about 2 months pregnant when she left me. If she carried the baby to term, he'd be exactly Tommy's age now. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Look at this. He showed Loretta a photo of himself as a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The resemblance to Tommy was unmistakable, chilling in its precision. The same dark, intense eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw, even the same slight gap between his front teeth that Tommy was always trying to hide when he smiled. Loretta's hands were shaking now, a violent tremor she couldn't suppress. This could be a coincidence, she whispered, clinging to the last shred of normalcy. Lots of children look alike. That's what I told myself at first, David said, his voice getting harder, more determined, shedding its earlier nervousness. But then I started digging. I hired another investigator, a better one this time. Meadow Martinez. That's not even her real name, by the way. Her real name is Margaret Winters. And she's done this before. Done what before? Loretta asked, her voice hoarse. Disappeared when things got complicated. Left men when they started asking too many questions. David's eyes were intense now, burning with a quiet fury. The investigator found 2 other guys, Mrs. Patterson, 2 other men who had relationships with her that ended the same way. Suddenly, completely gone, like she'd never existed. One of them thinks she might have been pregnant when she left him, too. Loretta felt like she was drowning, submerged in a cold, dark sea of deception. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because I've been watching from a distance for 3 months, David said, his voice cracking with emotion. Trying to figure out what to do. Trying to decide if I had the right to disrupt a child's life based on suspicions and coincidences. He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. But then I saw the photos from your cruise. The happy family vacation, everyone smiling and laughing. And I realized something that made me sick. What? Loretta prompted, her voice barely a whisper. You weren't in any of the photos. I looked through all of Meadow's social media, Mrs. Patterson. Hundreds of pictures of family gatherings, birthday parties, holidays. Tommy and Emma are in all of them. Your son Elliot is in most of them. But you're barely there, like you're being written out of your own family's story. The truth of it hit Loretta like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left her breathless. She thought about all those missed events, all those last-minute changes, and convenient miscommunications. All those times she'd felt like an outsider looking in at her own family, a ghost at her own celebrations. I started thinking about my own experience with Meadow, David continued, his voice softer now, empathetic. How she isolated me from my friends and family near the end. How she made me feel like I was the problem, like I was too demanding, too clingy. How she convinced me that the people who cared about me didn't really understand our relationship. She's doing the same thing to Elliot. I think so, Loretta whispered, the words tasting bitter. And I think she's doing it to you too. Which means if Tommy really is my son, he's not the only victim here. You are too. David reached into his coat again and pulled out a manila envelope. This is why I'm here, Mrs. Patterson. Why I finally worked up the courage to knock on your door. What is it? Loretta asked, her voice trembling. DNA test results. He managed to get a sample of Tommy's hair from the barber shop where Meadow took him. Had it tested against his own DNA. His hands were shaking as he handed Loretta the envelope. I got the results yesterday. Loretta stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it, afraid of the Pandora's box it might contain. Inside was information that could destroy her family or save it, and she had no way of knowing which. Before you open that, David said quietly, his voice gentle, I need you to know something else. I don't want to take Tommy away from the only father he's ever known. I don't want to traumatize him or disrupt his life. But I can't stand by and watch Meadow manipulate and lie to the people who love him, including you. What are you asking me to do? Loretta asked. Her voice barely a whisper. I'm asking you to help me make sure he's protected from her, from whatever game she's been playing with all of us. David's voice was steady now, resolved, a quiet strength emerging. Because if she's lied about this, Mrs. Patterson, what else has she lied about? And who else is she going to hurt? Loretta looked at the envelope in her hands, feeling the immense weight of whatever truth was inside, a truth that promised to unravel everything she thought she knew. Outside, a car door slammed, and she heard children laughing as they walked past her house. Normal sounds of a normal afternoon, in a normal neighborhood where mothers didn't steal children and grandmothers didn't get erased from family photos. But her life hadn't been normal for a long time. She just hadn't wanted to admit it. Mrs. Patterson, David's voice was gentle now, almost kind, pulling her back from the precipice of her thoughts. Are you ready to know the truth? Loretta thought about Tommy's sweet face, about the way he used to run to her with his arms outstretched, his laughter echoing in her home, before Meadow started subtly discouraging those displays of affection. She thought about Emma, who barely knew her anymore because Loretta had been systematically excluded from so much of her life. She thought about Elliot, her son, her beloved son, who'd been slowly poisoned against his own mother, his loyalty twisted. She thought about her empty birthday party and all those family photos where she didn't exist, a ghost in her own family's narrative. Yes, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands, and opened the envelope. The DNA results were written in clinical, unforgiving language, stark black print on crisp white paper. Loretta's eyes scanned the words, then reread them, hoping somehow they'd change, hoping this was all an elaborate mistake or a cruel joke. 99.7% probability of paternity. The numbers swam before her eyes, blurring into an incomprehensible mess. She read them again and again, her mind desperately searching for an escape clause, a loophole. But there was none. Tommy wasn't Elliot's son. Her grandson, the little boy she'd watched take his first steps, helped teach to tie his shoes, read bedtime stories to when he was small enough to curl up in her lap, his warm weight, a comfort. He wasn't her blood at all. And Elliot, her devoted son, who'd named Tommy after his own beloved grandfather, had no idea he'd been raising another man's child for 7 years. I'm sorry, David said quietly, his voice filled with genuine empathy. He was still sitting on her couch, watching Loretta's face as she processed the devastating information. His own pain reflected in his eyes. I know this must be devastating. Loretta set the papers down with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, her fingers tracing the cold, stark numbers. How long have you known for certain? She managed to ask, her voice a strained whisper. Since yesterday, David replied. But I've suspected for months. He pulled out his phone again and showed her more photos. Surveillance pictures he'd obviously taken from a distance, grainy but clear enough to make out the details. Tommy playing at a park. Tommy walking into a school building. Tommy riding a bike down what looked like Loretta's own neighborhood street. I've been following them sometimes. I know how that sounds, he admitted. A hint of shame in his voice, but I had to be sure. You've been watching my family, Loretta accused, a raw edge to her voice. I've been watching my son, David corrected, his voice firm but not hostile, his gaze unwavering, and trying to understand what kind of woman could steal a child and build an entire life around that lie. The anger came then, hot and overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to consume her. Not at David. He was as much a victim as the rest of them. Perhaps even more so. But at Meadow, at the sheer magnitude of her deception, the breathtaking cruelty of it. She hadn't just lied about Tommy's parentage. She'd built her entire marriage on that lie, a house of cards constructed on a foundation of deceit. She'd used an innocent child, a precious, vulnerable little boy, as the foundation for a life she had no right to claim, a life stolen from others. She trapped Elliot, Loretta said. The words coming out harsh and bitter, tasting like ash. She got pregnant with another man's baby and used it to secure a marriage to my son. It looks that way. David's expression was grim, his eyes shadowed with a shared understanding of betrayal. The timeline fits perfectly. She left me when she was about 2 months along, just starting to show. If she moved fast, found someone quickly, she could have convinced him the baby was premature or just small. Loretta thought back to Tommy's birth. How excited Elliot had been when he called to tell her Meadow was in labor. He came 3 weeks early, Loretta remembered, recalling Elliot's worried voice. Elliot was worried about complications, but the doctor said everything was fine, because everything was fine. Tommy wasn't premature. He was exactly on schedule for David's timeline, not Elliot's. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity, each one a sharp shard of truth. Meadow's whirlwind romance with her son, the quick engagement, the wedding that happened barely 6 months after they met. Loretta had thought it was romantic at the time, true love conquering all. Now she realized it was something much more calculated, a cold, ruthless strategy. She needed a father for Tommy before he was born, Loretta said. The realization dawning on her with a chilling certainty. Someone stable. Someone who wouldn't question the timing too closely. Someone trusting, David added, his voice low. Someone who wouldn't demand a paternity test because the thought would never occur to him. That was Elliot. Exactly. Her son had always been honest to a fault, incapable of the kind of deception that would make him suspicious of others. He took people at face value, believed what they told him. It was one of his best qualities, and Meadow had weaponized it against him, using his inherent goodness as a tool for her own gain. There's more, David said, and something in his tone, a new gravity, made Loretta's stomach clench. The investigator I hired found out some other things about Meadow, things that might explain why she's been pushing you out of the picture. What things? Loretta asked, her voice tight with apprehension. David pulled out a folder from his coat and handed it to her. Inside were photographs, official-looking documents, what looked like copies of official records. Her real name is Margaret Winters. She's 34, not 31 like she told your son. She grew up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18. No family, no real connections anywhere. Loretta studied a photograph that looked like it came from a high school yearbook. The face was definitely Meadow, but younger, harder somehow. Her hair was different, darker, and there was something in her eyes that Loretta had never seen in the woman who married her Sona. Kind of desperate hunger, a calculating glint. "She's been married before," David continued, his voice flat, devoid of judgment, just stating facts. "Twice. Once to a man named Robert Kim in Nevada, once to someone called James Fletcher in Oregon. Both marriages ended in divorce within 2 years. Both times with her getting significant alimony settlements." "She's done this before," Loretta whispered. The pattern's chillingly clear. The pattern's always the same. She meets a man with money or stability, moves fast to lock him down, then systematically isolates him from his support system friends, family, anyone who might see through her act or ask uncomfortable questions. Loretta thought about how Elliot's college friends had gradually stopped coming around after he married Meadow. How he'd drifted away from his work colleagues, rarely talking about his job anymore, except to mention how stressful it was. How he'd become increasingly dependent on Meadow for social connections, for emotional support, for everything. "She's been isolating him," Loretta said. The words heavy with realization. "And you, because you're the biggest threat to her control." Mothers see things other people miss. They ask questions. They remember details from before she came along. David leaned forward, his expression intense, his eyes locked on hers. "She needed you out of the picture, Mrs. Patterson. Not just distant, completely erased. That's why the birthday party sabotage. That's why all the missed events and miscommunications. She's been systematically training your family to function without you." The sheer cruelty of it took Loretta's breath away, leaving her gasping for air. But why? If she already had Elliot, if he believed Tommy was his son, why go to such lengths to exclude me? "Because you're a witness to the timeline," David said softly, his voice certain. "You remember when they met? When she got pregnant? When Tommy was born? If you'd ever started asking questions, comparing dates, you might have figured out the truth." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "She needed you to become irrelevant before you became dangerous." Loretta stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where she could see the quiet street where Tommy had learned to ride his bike. The very street where she had cheered him on, bandaged his scraped knees, celebrated every tiny milestone with him. He was still the same child, still sweet and funny and bright. But everything about his place in their family was a lie. "What about Emma?" Loretta asked, dreading the answer, fearing another layer of deception. "As far as I can tell, Emma really is Elliot's daughter, born 2 years after Tommy, during a time when Meadow and your son were definitely together." "But, Mrs. Patterson..." David hesitated, his brow furrowed. "What?" Loretta urged. Emma's birth might have been calculated too, a way to make sure Elliot never questioned Tommy's parentage. If Meadow could give him a biological child, he'd be less likely to doubt that Tommy was his too. And it would cement their relationship even further. Loretta felt sick to her stomach. Everything about her son's marriage, his family, his life for the past 7 years had been orchestrated by a woman who saw him not as a person to love but as a resource to exploit. And she'd used children, innocent children, as tools in her manipulation, pawns in her cruel game. "Tommy doesn't know, does he?" Loretta asked, her voice filled with anguish. "Of course not. He's 7 years old. As far as he's concerned, Elliot is his father and always has been. And Emma, she doesn't know either. She just thinks she has a big brother who looks different from her. Kids don't question these things, but adults did, or they should." And Loretta was starting to understand why Meadow had worked so hard to make her irrelevant. A grandmother who spent time with her grandchildren, who was really present in their lives, might eventually notice that Tommy looked nothing like his supposed father, might start asking questions about family resemblances, about genetic traits that didn't add up. "David," Loretta said slowly, her voice gaining strength, a new resolve hardening her tone. "Why did you decide to tell me this now? You could have just demanded a paternity test, gone through the courts, tried to get custody. Why involve me?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands, choosing his words carefully. Because I realized something when I saw those cruise photos. Meadow isn't just destroying my relationship with my son, she's destroying yours, too. And if we don't stop her, she's going to keep doing it to other people. What do you mean? Loretta asked, her mind racing. She's already starting to pull back from Elliot's friends, from his work colleagues, making him more and more dependent on her for everything. And she's teaching the kids to see him as the only parent who really matters. Tommy barely talks about you anymore when I've watched them at the park. It's like she's erasing you from his memory. The truth of that hit Loretta like another physical blow. She thought about how different Tommy had become in recent months. How he'd stopped running to hug her when she visited. How he'd started looking to Meadow for permission before talking to her. Loretta had thought he was just growing up, becoming more independent. But maybe it was something else entirely. She's going to discard Elliot eventually. David continued, his voice grim. Just like she discarded me. Just like she discarded her previous husbands. But first, she's going to make sure he has nothing left except her and the kids. No friends, no family, no support system. When she's ready to move on, he'll be completely alone. Loretta closed her eyes, seeing her son's future stretched out before him, isolated, abandoned, probably broke if Meadow was as calculating as she appeared to be. And the children caught in the middle of it all, used as pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. What do you want me to do? Loretta asked, her voice steady now, a quiet determination replacing her earlier despair. David stood up, gathering his papers and photos, his posture now radiating a quiet strength. I want you to help me save our family, both of us. Because that's what we are, Mrs. Patterson. Family. You're Tommy's grandmother in every way that matters, even if we don't share DNA. And I'm not going to let Meadow destroy that just because she's afraid of the truth. He handed Loretta a business card with his contact information. Think about it, but don't think too long. They'll be back from their cruise in a few days, and when they are, Meadow's going to be watching for any sign that you're becoming a problem again. If we're going to act, it has to be soon. After David left, Loretta sat in her living room, holding the DNA results and staring at that business card. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, and the house felt quieter than ever. But for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the calm before a storm. Because Meadow Martinez, or Margaret Winters, or whatever her real name was, had made a critical mistake. She'd thought she could erase Loretta completely, make her irrelevant to her own family's story. But Loretta wasn't gone yet, and now that she knew what Meadow really was, she wasn't going anywhere. 3 days after Elliot's family returned from their Mediterranean cruise, Loretta called him. Her voice was steady, practiced, betraying none of the turmoil that had raged within her for the past week. She'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, every word carefully chosen. "Hi, sweetheart," she began, a warmth she didn't entirely feel radiating through the phone. "I was wondering if we could all get together for dinner this weekend. I have something important I'd like to discuss with you and Meadow." There was a pause on the other end, a subtle hesitation. "Is everything okay, Mom? You sound serious." "Everything's fine," Loretta replied, keeping her voice light, almost breezy. "I just think it's time we had a real family conversation about us, about the future. I've been doing some thinking while you were away." Another pause. Longer, this time. Loretta could hear Meadow's voice in the background, a low murmur, though she couldn't make out the words. When Elliot came back on the line, his tone was more cautious, a hint of suspicion in it. "Meadow wants to know what kind of conversation. She's concerned that you might be upset about the cruise timing." Of course, she was concerned. Meadow's instincts were sharp, honed by years of deception. She could probably sense that something had shifted, even through the phone lines, a subtle change in the air. "Tell Meadow I'm not upset about anything," Loretta said, her voice firm, unwavering. I just think it's important for families to communicate openly, don't you? Saturday evening would be perfect. I'll cook. Let me check with Meadow and get back to you. The fact that her 38-year-old son needed to check with his wife about having dinner with his mother would have been laughable if it weren't so heartbreaking. But Loretta kept her voice light. Of course, let me know, he called back 2 hours later. Saturday works. 6 o'clock. Perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. That was Thursday. Loretta spent Friday preparing for what she knew would be the most important conversation of her life. A confrontation that would either shatter her family or finally set it free. David and Loretta had met twice more since his first visit, meticulously planning how to present the truth in a way that would protect Tommy while exposing Meadow's deception without causing undue trauma to the children. The DNA results were safely tucked in a manila folder on her kitchen counter, along with copies of the documents David's investigator had found. Margaret Winter's real identity, her previous marriages, the timeline that proved Tommy couldn't be Elliot's biological son, everything they needed to strip away the layers of lies Meadow had built her life on. Loretta made Elliot's favorite meal. Pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes and the green beans he'd loved since childhood. If this was going to be the last family dinner they ever shared, she wanted it to be memorable for the right reasons, at least initially. Saturday evening arrived, gray and drizzly. Typical October weather. Loretta set the dining room table with her good china. The same dishes she'd planned to use for her birthday celebration 2 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. They arrived precisely at 6 o'clock. Meadow was wearing a flowing cream-colored dress that made her look younger, more innocent, an angelic facade. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her smile radiating warmth. She looked like the picture of a devoted wife and mother, someone utterly incapable of deception. Tommy bounded through the door first, all 7-year-old energy and excitement. Grandma Loretta! I learned to swim on the cruise. Want to see me do the doggy paddle? Loretta's heart clenched as she hugged him. A pang of sorrow mixed with love. Knowing what she was about to reveal would change everything for this innocent child. Maybe after dinner, sweetheart. Go wash your hands. Emma followed more quietly, clutching a small doll with tangled hair. At 5, she was more reserved than her brother, more cautious around Loretta since Meadow had started subtly discouraging their affection, but she still let Loretta kiss her forehead before following Tommy to the bathroom. Elliot hugged Loretta warmly, and for a fleeting moment, Loretta could pretend this was just a normal family dinner, a simple reunion. Something smells incredible, Mom. I've missed your cooking. You look tired, Loretta observed, noting the new lines around his eyes and the weight he'd lost. Work's been brutal lately. The mergers got everyone stressed. He glanced at Meadow, who had appeared beside them, already examining Loretta's living room like she was cataloging potential problems. But Meadow keeps telling me I need to find a better work-life balance. Stress is so bad for your health, Meadow said, her voice dripping with practiced concern, her smile unwavering. I keep encouraging Elliot to consider early retirement. We could travel more, spend more time with the children. Early retirement at 38. Another insidious way to make Elliot completely dependent on her, cutting him off from his professional identity and income. Loretta smiled back pleasantly, a mask of calm. How wonderful that you're thinking about the future. That's actually related to what I wanted to discuss tonight. During dinner, Loretta kept the conversation light, almost deceptively so. The children chattered about their cruise adventures, and Meadow played the perfect mother, cutting Tommy's meat and reminding Emma to use her napkin. She was good at this performance. Warm, attentive, completely believable. But Loretta noticed things she'd missed before, subtle cues that now screamed manipulation. How Meadow interrupted when Tommy started telling a story about missing Loretta while they were gone. How she redirected Emma's attention when the little girl innocently asked why Loretta hadn't come on the trip with them. How she subtly managed every interaction, controlling the flow of conversation and affection, ensuring no genuine connection could form between Loretta and the children. After the children finished eating, Loretta suggested they play in the living room while the adults talked. Meadow immediately objected, her voice sharp with feigned concern. Oh, they should probably get ready to go soon. Tomorrow's a school day, and we like to keep their routine consistent. This won't take long, Loretta said firmly, her gaze unwavering, meeting Meadow's eyes directly. And I think what I have to share might affect their routine quite a bit. Something flickered across Meadow's face. Just for a second, a fleeting shadow of fear, but Loretta caught it. When the children were settled with their toys in the next room, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the tension in the dining room, Loretta returned to the table where Elliot and Meadow waited. The manila folder sat on the table beside her coffee cup, a silent, loaded weapon. So, Elliot said, reaching for Meadow's hand across the table, a gesture of solidarity that twisted Loretta's gut. What did you want to talk about? Loretta took a deep breath, feeling the immense weight of the moment, the years of hidden truths pressing down on her. I wanted to talk about honesty, she began, her voice clear and steady. About family, about the importance of knowing who we really are. Meadow's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a hairline crack in her perfect facade. That's a little philosophical for dinner conversation, Loretta. Is it? Loretta challenged, her voice gaining strength. I don't think so. She picked up the manila folder, feeling both Elliot and Meadow tense, their eyes fixed on her hands. You see, I've learned some interesting things recently about family history, about genetics, about the importance of medical records and accurate information. Mom, Elliot said slowly, his voice laced with apprehension. What's in the folder? The truth. Loretta opened it and pulled out the DNA results, setting them on the table between them. These are the results of a paternity test for Tommy. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken dread. Elliot stared at the papers like they might burst into flames, his face paling. Meadow went very still, her face carefully blank, a mask of feigned confusion. A paternity test? Elliot's voice was barely a whisper, a thread of disbelief. Why would you? How did you? The test shows that you are not Tommy's biological father, Loretta said gently, her voice softening for her son. There's a 99.7% probability that another man is his father. A man named David Chen. Meadow stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, a harsh sound that broke the silence. This is insane, Loretta. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but sit down, Margaret. The use of her real name hit Meadow like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, her face going white, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. Elliot looked between them, confusion and growing horror warring in his expression. Margaret? Mom. What's going on? Loretta pulled out the investigator's report, the marriage certificates, the timeline documentation. Meadow's real name is Margaret Winters. She's been married twice before, and she has a pattern of lying about her identity and her past. She was involved with David Chen before she met you, Elliot. She left him when she was pregnant with his child, and came to find a new father for her baby. That's not true. Meadow shrieked, but her voice was shaking now, devoid of its usual sweetness. Elliot, don't listen to this. Your mother has obviously had some kind of breakdown. Tommy was born 7 months after you two met, Loretta continued relentlessly, her voice a steady, unwavering force. You thought he was premature, but he wasn't. He was born exactly on schedule for the timeline of Meadow's relationship with David. Elliot picked up the DNA results with hands that were trembling uncontrollably. Loretta watched his face as he read them, watched the color drain from his cheeks as the damning numbers sank in. This can't be right, he whispered, his voice broken. David Chen has been looking for his son for 7 years, Loretta said, her gaze fixed on Meadow, who was backing toward the doorway now, her perfect composure completely shattered. He found you 3 months ago and has been watching from a distance, trying to decide what to do. He came to me because he recognized what Meadow was doing to our family. The same isolation tactics she used on him. Elliot, please don't let her poison you against me, Meadow pleaded, her voice desperate. Think about our life together. Our family. Our family. Elliot's voice was raw, broken, filled with a profound sense of betrayal. Our family that's built on a lie? Our son who isn't actually our son? He is your son in every way that matters, Meadow cried, tears streaming down her face. A performance Loretta knew was calculated. You raised him. You love him. Based on a lie. Elliot slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump, the sound echoing through the tense silence. Everything, Meadow. Everything has been a lie. From the living room came the innocent sound of children's laughter. Tommy and Emma playing their games, unaware that their world was imploding in the next room. There's more, Loretta said quietly, and pulled out the records of Meadow's previous marriages. She's done this before. Found men, married them quickly, isolated them from their families, then moved on when it suited her. You're not her first victim, Elliot. You're just the most successful one. Elliot stared at the documents, his breathing shallow and fast, his face a mask of shock. The cruise, he said suddenly, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Your birthday. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? Meadow said nothing, but her silence was answer enough, a chilling confirmation. You planned it deliberately. You made sure Mom would be alone on her birthday while we were all together having fun without her. You wanted to hurt her. I wanted to protect our family, Meadow started, her voice regaining a sliver of its old manipulative tone. From what? Elliot demanded, his voice rising. From my mother? From the woman who raised me and loved me and would never hurt anyone? From someone who would eventually figure out the truth, Loretta said softly, her gaze unwavering. That's what this has all been about, Elliot. The missed events, the last-minute changes, the gradual separation from your friends and family. Meadow needed to isolate you completely before you started asking questions she couldn't answer. Elliot looked up at his wife. His wife, who wasn't who she claimed to be, whose entire life with him was built on deception. Is any of it real? He whispered, his voice raw with pain. Do you love me at all? Or was I just convenient? For the first time since Loretta had known her, Meadow had no answer. No smooth deflection, no manipulation, no perfectly crafted response. She just stood there, exposed and silent, her veneer completely stripped away. That silence told them everything they needed to know. From the living room, Tommy called out, his innocent voice piercing the tension. Daddy, can we have ice cream? Elliot closed his eyes, and Loretta saw a single tear slip down his cheek, a raw testament to his shattered world. What do I tell them? He whispered, his voice thick with anguish. How do I explain this to the children? We'll figure it out, Loretta said, reaching across the table to take his trembling hand, offering a lifeline. Together, as a family. But Tommy is still your son in every way that matters. That doesn't change. But he also has a biological father who loves him and wants to be part of his life. And maybe if we handle this right, that can be a good thing. Meadow turned toward the door, her shoulders slumped in defeat. But Loretta called after her. Margaret. She stopped but didn't turn around. David isn't going to disappear this time, and neither am I. If you try to run with the children, we'll find you. If you try to manipulate this situation or hurt these kids to protect yourself, we'll stop you. Your days of controlling this family are over. She walked out without another word, leaving behind the innocent sound of children playing and the wreckage of 7 years of lies. But for the first time in months, Loretta didn't feel like she was losing her family. She felt like she was finally getting it back. 6 months later, the scent of Loretta's famous apple pie filled her kitchen, a comforting aroma that spoke of healing and new beginnings. She was humming softly as she prepared Sunday dinner, a weekly ritual that had become the cornerstone of their unconventional new family. She heard the front door open and Tommy's voice, clear and joyful, calling out, Grandma, we brought dessert. Come in here, sweetheart. Loretta called back, smiling as she heard the thunder of small feet running toward her. Tommy burst through the kitchen doorway, his arms wrapped around a bakery box that was almost too big for him to carry, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Behind him came Emma, more careful with her steps, clutching a small bouquet of bright yellow daisies. "These are for you," she said shyly, holding out the flowers. "Daddy said yellow is your favorite color." Loretta knelt down to accept the bouquet, pulling Emma into a hug that she no longer hesitated to return, her small arms wrapping tightly around Loretta's neck. "They're perfect, sweetheart." "Thank you." Elliot appeared in the doorway, looking healthier and more relaxed than he had in years. The gauntness he'd acquired during those final, stressful months with Meadow had vanished, and the deep stress lines around his eyes had softened, replaced by a genuine warmth. Behind him stood David, still somewhat tentative in these family gatherings, but gradually, gracefully, finding his place in their complicated new dynamic. "Something smells incredible," Elliot said, kissing Loretta's cheek. "Is that your famous apple pie?" "Tommy specifically requested it," Loretta said, ruffling the little boy's brown hair. "Along with mashed potatoes and that chicken recipe you used to love." "The one with the herbs?" Tommy's eyes lit up. "Yes. That's my favorite too. Just like Daddy's." The easy way he called both Elliot and David Daddy still took some getting used to for the adults, a gentle reminder of the seismic shifts their lives had undergone. But the children had adapted to their expanded family with the remarkable resilience that only kids possess. Tommy called Elliot Daddy and David Daddy Dave, while Emma had simply accepted that Tommy had two fathers, the same way some of her friends had two houses. David set a bottle of wine on the counter, still moving carefully in what had once been Meadow's fiercely guarded domain. "How can I help?" "You can set the table," Loretta said, gesturing towards the dining room. "The good china is in the cabinet." It had taken months to reach this point. Months of difficult, often painful family therapy sessions, carefully guided conversations with the children, and protracted legal proceedings that finally ended with Meadow's voluntary relinquishment of custody in exchange for avoiding prosecution for fraud. She'd disappeared again, just as she had from David's life 7 years ago, leaving behind no forwarding address, no trace. But this time, she'd left the children behind, a bittersweet victory. The transition hadn't been easy. Tommy had been confused and heartbroken by his mother's sudden absence, grappling with a loss he couldn't fully comprehend. Despite all her manipulations, Emma had been clingy and anxious, afraid that more people she loved would simply disappear. There had been tears, tantrums, and countless sleepless nights for all of them. But there had also been profound healing. Elliot had moved back into the house he'd shared with Meadow, but everything felt different now. The oppressive atmosphere of secrets, of walking on eggshells, was gone, replaced by an open, honest communication. David had rented an apartment just 10 minutes away, close enough to be part of daily life, but far enough to give everyone space to adjust and breathe. "Grandma," Tommy said, tugging on Loretta's apron, pulling her gently from her thoughts. "Can I tell you a secret?" Loretta knelt down to his level, her heart swelling with love. "Of course you can." He cupped his hands around his mouth and whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm glad you found Daddy Dave. Now I have the most daddies of anyone in my class." Loretta's heart squeezed with love for this resilient little boy who'd turned a complicated, painful situation into a source of pride. "I'm glad too, sweetheart, and I'm glad Mommy Meadow went away," he added more quietly, his small face serious. "She was always mad about something." It broke Loretta's heart that a 7-year-old had been so aware of the tension and unhappiness in his household. But it also reassured her that they'd made the right choices. Children knew more than adults gave them credit for, and Tommy had sensed his mother's manipulation, even if he couldn't name it. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between the adults, punctuated by the children's lively chatter about school and friends. David told them about Tommy's latest soccer game, where he'd scored his very first goal, his face beaming with pride. Elliot shared Emma's excitement about starting dance classes, already envisioning her on stage. They talked like the family they'd become. Unconventional, perhaps, but real in a way that Meadow's carefully orchestrated version had never been. "I got a call from my lawyer yesterday," Elliot said as they cleared the dinner plates, a note of finality in his voice. "The divorce is finally final." "How do you feel about that?" Loretta asked, watching his expression carefully. He was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy help David load the dishwasher. A domestic scene of quiet harmony. "Relieved, mostly," Elliot admitted, "and grateful that it's over without more damage to the kids." "Any regrets?" Loretta prompted gently. "About ending the marriage?" "Number about not seeing the truth sooner?" He shrugged, a weary gesture. "I think I'll always regret that. How much time we lost. How much pain she caused you. Especially," Loretta added softly, squeezing his shoulder. "You can't blame yourself for trusting someone you loved." "That's not a character flaw, Elliot. That's just being human." David joined them at the counter, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Has there been any word from her?" "Nothing," Elliot said, his voice flat. "Her lawyer said she doesn't want any contact with the children. No visitation, no phone calls, nothing." "That's probably for the best," Loretta said, though it still amazed her that any mother could walk away so completely from her children. At least this way the kids can heal without worrying about when she might disrupt their lives again. Later, after the children had fallen asleep watching a movie in the living room, the three adults sat around Loretta's kitchen table with coffee and leftover pie. These had become some of Loretta's favorite moments. Quiet conversations in the evening light, planning for the future, talking through the challenges of co-parenting in such an unusual situation. "I've been thinking about something," David said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "About Tommy's last name." Elliot looked up sharply. "What about it?" "He's been Patterson his whole life. That's his identity, his school records, everything. I don't want to change that." "I don't want to change that either," David clarified, then pushed forward, a hopeful note in his voice. "But I was wondering, would it be okay if I took your name too? Officially. I mean, David Patterson Chen, so Tommy and I would share part of a name, but he'd still be connected to you and your family history." The gesture was so thoughtful, so carefully designed to honor everyone's place in Tommy's life, that Loretta felt tears prick her eyes. Elliot looked stunned, then a wide smile spread across his face. "You'd do that?" "I want Tommy to know that families can be complicated without being broken," David said, his eyes earnest. "I want him to understand that loving someone doesn't mean you have to choose sides or pretend other relationships don't matter." Elliot reached across the table and shook David's hand, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. "I think that's perfect." As the evening wound down and David prepared to take the children to his apartment for their weekly overnight stay, Loretta pulled him aside. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "For what?" David asked, a gentle smile on his face. "For saving my family. For having the courage to tell me the truth when it would have been easier to just disappear again." David was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy gather his backpack and favorite stuffed animal, his small face sleepy. "You know what I realized that day I came to your door? I wasn't just losing my son. You were losing your family, too. Meadow was taking all of us away from each other, piece by piece. But we stopped her." "We did," Loretta agreed, a sense of quiet triumph filling her. He smiled, and for the first time since Loretta had met him, it reached his eyes completely. A genuine, unburdened joy. "And look what we built instead." Loretta looked around her house, at the children's artwork taped to the refrigerator, at Emma's forgotten sweater draped over a chair, at the family photos that now included David and truly reflected their reality. It wasn't the family she'd imagined when Elliot first got married, but it was infinitely better than the hollow performance Meadow had orchestrated. After everyone left, Loretta sat in her living room with a cup of tea, reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since that devastating birthday 6 months ago. The empty house that had felt like a tomb now hummed with the echoes of family life. Children's laughter, David's careful questions about family traditions, Elliot's relieved conversations about his future plans. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. The kids are asking if we can do this every Sunday." I told them that was up to Grandma. Loretta typed back. "Every Sunday sounds perfect. This is what families do." His response came quickly. "Yes, this is what real families do." Loretta set the phone aside and looked at the framed photo on her side table. A picture from last month's trip to the zoo. All 5 of them crowded together in front of the elephant enclosure. Tommy was perched on David's shoulders while Emma held tight to Loretta's hand. Elliot stood in the middle, one arm around Loretta and the other around David, grinning like he'd just remembered what happiness felt like. They looked like what they were. A family that had been broken apart and put back together in a new configuration. Stronger and more honest than before. Not conventional, but real. Not perfect, but true. The house settled around her as night fell, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of possibilities. Full of the love that Meadow had tried so hard to destroy, but had never quite managed to extinguish. Loretta had thought her 65th birthday had marked the end of her relevance to her family's story. Instead, it had marked the beginning of a new chapter. One where love wasn't conditional, where truth mattered more than appearance, and where being a grandmother meant protecting your grandchildren from anyone who would use them as weapons, even their own mother. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant Tommy had soccer practice and Emma had her dance class. David would pick up Tommy while Elliot took Emma, and they'd both end up back here for homework and dinner. It was the kind of routine that Meadow would have controlled and manipulated, but that now flowed naturally from their genuine care for each other. As Loretta turned off the lights and headed upstairs, she thought about the woman who'd tried to erase her from her own family's life. Somewhere out there, Meadow was probably spinning a new identity, crafting a new story, looking for a new family to infiltrate and control. But she'd left something behind that she'd never be able to replace. The love between people who chose to fight for each other instead of giving up. She'd taught them all what they didn't want to be. And in doing so, she'd helped them become exactly who they were meant to be. For that, if nothing else. Loretta supposed she owed her a twisted kind of gratitude. But mostly, she just felt sorry for her. Meadow had had a real family within her grasp. Flawed and complicated, but genuine. And she'd thrown it away for the hollow satisfaction of control. Her loss. Their gain. And finally, after months of feeling like a ghost in her own life, Loretta was home. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.